This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes per detail.
Balancing a wellness routine and busy travel plans? Try Alo Moves, the health and wellness app you need to stay consistent. Join alomoves.com with code ACAST for a 30-day free trial and 20% off an annual membership. From yoga and Pilates to strength workouts, Alo Moves has it all. From 5 to 60 minutes, Alo Moves has classes or flow that fit your schedule. Plus, Alo Moves offers meditations, sound baths, nutrition tips, and self-care tutorials. Find your perfect wellness routine anytime and anywhere with Alo Moves.
This edition is a walk in the park, more specifically the Parca d'Ora in northwestern Turin. The space, which is around 40 hectares, was once home to a sheet metalworks and tyre factory, supplying the Italian car giant Fiat. In the 1980s, the factories closed, the area was abandoned. Left behind were 2 long lines of 30-metre tall cooling towers. And so here you can walk along the Dora River, sit on the grass, look across a dramatic post-industrial landscape, and, if you come at a certain time of year, meet a special group of urban foragers.
Oh, the thistle? There's one right here. So you see right here, and right here, and right here. And then in the patch that we were standing in before, there's also a larger Italian thistle, which hurt a lot more.
The Parca d'Ora is no ordinary park, and Alexis Nicole Nelson is no ordinary forager. On social media, to her 5 million followers, Alexis is also known as the Black Forager, and she's an expert at bringing the history of human interactions with nature and its food to life. And so in this walk in the park, she guided us from small patches of thistles to a chance discovery of wild lettuce.
A lot of people, I feel like, don't know that lettuce is an aster, not a brassica. I feel like folks associate it so closely with cabbage, whereas actually it is an aster that is more closely related to dandelions. And it has taken a lot of human breeding to get lettuce to go from how bitter it is in the wild to like the really mild, tender butter lettuce that we've grown to know in the grocery store now.
Unless it's starting to set up a stalk.
Unless it's starting to bolt. Then it gets very bitter very fast.
What surprised me was that although Alexis is from Ohio in the American Midwest, many of the wild plants we were finding in this park in northern Italy looked and tasted familiar to her.
The reason why we have a lot of these plants in the United States is because a lot of them were brought over with the colonists. And honestly, something that I think is really beautiful in a lot of different countries is being able to trace a lot of the history of immigrants in that country through the wild plants that show up there. For example, in Ohio, when I see garlic mustard, a lot of British colonists brought it over with them because it was a popular forage for a whole lot of folks. I believe it's sometimes called Jack on the Hedge, more colloquially in the UK. And it was a popular food, so it made the trek over. When I see things like ground elder, a lot of more Western and Mediterranean immigrants brought that over with them. It was a food and it was a treatment for gout. So of course they're going to want to make sure that that makes the trip over with them too. you can read a lot of a story of the people in an area through the plants that are growing in that area currently. And so because of how globalized our society has become, it makes sense that we have all of these plants in common, especially in disturbed spaces like this, because a lot of those plants are places that really thrive under human disturbance. Yeah.
Fascinating, because we think crops, yes, wild plants.
You would think there'd be a lot more difference.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things about studying ethnobotany in general is that you get to make that cultural connection with the plants too. Yeah. And it always tells a wider story of an area getting to read it through the plants.
Yeah.
Forager Alexis Nicole Nelson with stories of how humans, through food, have interacted with nature and helped shape biodiversity, which is the theme of this edition of the food programme. We were in Turin's Parca d'Ora for Terra Madre, the biannual gathering of the slow food movement, founded in Italy to celebrate food diversity, traditions, knowledge, and the farmers and producers keeping it all alive. This is a major global event attracting 300,000 people from around the world. From cooks to community activists, academics to inspirational expert speakers such as Alexis.
A lot more. These ones are still pretty soft.
The title of this year's event was We Are Nature, based on the idea that it's possible to produce food and farm in ways that can support biodiversity and work with nature. One of the organisers is Marta Messer.
We wanted to make a strong statement about the fact that we need to reconnect with nature, that we are part of nature. We live in societies where we often forget that or overlook that. And there would be no food and no farming and no harvesting without nature. And one of the big weaknesses and problems that we face nowadays is that we treat nature as a commodity. Food is often referred to as a commodity. Animals are referred to as livestock. So there is language, but it's not just language, it's really the concept.
As I'm making this programme, another global gathering is underway in Colombia, COP16, part of the UN's Convention on Biological Diversity, aimed at finding ways to deliver on its 30 by 30 commitment to protect 30% of the world's biodiversity by 2030. A target that also includes agricultural biodiversity, the diversity of crops and animal breeds humans have created over thousands of years, which, like so much of nature, is endangered. All relevant to the stories being told at Terra Madre.
We had many stories coming from people who really in their daily practices, whether they're farmers, whether they fish, whether they are foragers and so on, or whether they're food artisans, they really have that very strong connection with nature, and they can, in a way, teach us again how to be part of it again.
In this programme, we're going to be hearing some of those stories. Let's start with someone who travelled to Terra Madre from the United States.
My name is Sean Sherman. So I was born and raised on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I'm enrolled with the Oglala Lakota Sioux Tribe, and I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
For more than a decade, Sean Sherman, also known as the sous chef, has been working to reconnect the roughly 5 million Native American people in the US with traditional food systems, ways of being and eating that for more than 10,000 years depended on biodiversity.
The philosophy that we developed around the work that we do is featuring North American indigenous foods. So basically to do that, we took away colonial ingredients. So we removed things like there's no dairy, no wheat flour, no cane sugar, no beef, pork, chicken. And we focus on a lot of wild game, a lot of heirloom varietals of agricultural products. We buy directly from a lot of indigenous producers. We use a lot of wild foods, both game and plants, so lots of trees, lots of wild onions, wild tubers, greens, flowers, berries, fruits, there's a whole bunch of stuff, wild gingers. We have over 100 employees with 70% of our staff identifying as indigenous. We're moving a ton of products, like over $1 million a year going directly to indigenous food producers. We get to educate the people to come and experience what is true food of the United States, what is true food of North America.
Sean first appeared on the food programme almost 10 years ago when he set out on his research of North America's indigenous foods. Since that time, his ambitions and his profile have grown, and in the summer of 2021, he opened the first fully indigenous restaurant in the US.
The space where the restaurant is right on the Mississippi River. It's in front of what used to be a beautiful waterfall. In the Dakota language, it was called Awamni Yamni, and we took the first part of that name, so the restaurant's just called Awamni. The name means the place of the falling, swirling water, because it was the only waterfall on the Mississippi, because at one point it was about 300 feet across and 40 feet down. But during the colonization phase of Minnesota in the late 1800s, that waterfall was completely destroyed, and now it's just a concrete skirting and lock and dam.
I know from speaking to you and many other indigenous Native American chefs and cooks, the idea of growing up in the US, there was every kind of food possible to work with, to cook from, to celebrate, apart from the indigenous one.
Absolutely. We didn't have a lot of access to our own indigenous foods growing up on the reservation, and it was a huge epiphany for me much later in life after I'd already started working in restaurants and then realizing the complete absence of indigenous foods in America. And there were no native restaurants out there really at all, and so it really kind of struck me, and realizing that I didn't even know that much about Native American foods, even though I grew up in a Native American community and am enrolled in a Native American community. And so it took some time to try to rebuild. And, for us, like as Lakota in the middle of the United States, like we were still fighting the U.S. government till the turn of the century, so much of our knowledge was wiped out in less than a century, and which was really striking to me. And that's why I just really kind of created my life's mission to try to understand as much as we can from the past. We're just trying to create healthier food for a lot of the indigenous communities that have been affected by colonization, that are eating a lot of government foods that have been making us sick, where we can see like some communities with 60% type 2 diabetes, for example.
Some of the highest rates in the US.
Absolutely. So we're just trying to change the way that is and just doing it very independently through our nonprofit. And we see a very clear path of how to do that, and opening up these restaurants and spaces that can take some of the money that is generated from tourism and move it into a lot of our programming to create jobs for a lot of our indigenous youth and to create a whole new generation of skilled workers when it comes to food production.
And why is that so important? You mentioned about the obstacles when it comes to health and the food system and the impact on indigenous communities. What about employment? What about income and businesses?
Yeah, so, we're playing this game of playing with capitalism a little bit, utilizing these restaurants, and because the restaurants, are serving a very specific purpose for us. We're very intentional about it. But I just want to change the way things were from what I grew up with, because growing up on Pine Ridge, we're still over 70% unemployment on that reservation. We still have very little food access, especially nutritional access. And so a lot of our food access is coming from commodity food programs from the government, from the USDA, or a gas station, which is really difficult to eat healthy out of a gas station, basically. And so we're creating systems that we can create jobs to create food, basically, for the community, especially in that institutional style level of just creating foods for community centers, for hospitals, for school systems, and just, employing people directly on the reservation to make food for themselves, basically.
Sean Sherman on reconnecting North America with its indigenous foods, and in doing so, with its biodiversity. Our next story is also about keeping diversity alive, and it comes from the war underway in Ukraine.
Before the war, our cheesemakers, they did something miraculous. They created a new industry in Ukraine, the cheese making. You should try. They have high level cheeses already.
Yeah. This is Yulia Petienko, Slow Food's leader in Ukraine. For centuries, cheesemaking was found mostly in the Carpathian Mountains in the west. In recent times, there's been something of a dairy revolution. A new generation of women started reviving cheese-making traditions elsewhere in the country, using the milk of Ukraine's traditional and rare breeds of cows, sheep and goats.
You can imagine that these are ladies in Kharkiv region, in Zaporizhia region, in the Kiev region, in Chernihiv region. They risk their life and they continue to be on their land, continue to be with their animals and continue to create cheese. We brought these cheeses.
You've brought them here to Terra Madre in Italy. Yeah, for people to experience. So again, another.
We brought them with our luggage, let's say.
Food of resistance.
Yes, it is. It is.
But the main reason Yulia wanted to travel to Italy was to express gratitude to people at Terra Madre. When Russia invaded in the winter of 2022, farmers were among the most vulnerable. As the nation's focus turned to fighting the enemy, it looked likely that most of those rare breed animals would quickly go extinct. There was no food for them. And this is when Slow Food members around the world stepped in.
when we are coming on our way, we told ourselves, we are going to say thank you. Yes, because without that help that all slow food movement did for us in first months of the war, we would lose all our local breeds. We would lose all of them. Yes, because at the beginning of the war, they were without food. And all the people, they were thinking about their lives, about how to fight with enemy, and the government also were thinking about everything. And only slow food could understand the importance to protect these animals and these breeds. Yes, yes. They were all at the eastern part of Ukraine. Slow food members, they react immediately, and they started to send money just to my private card, and they immediately bought hay, because it was end of the February, beginning of the March. Nobody knew that the war is coming, so they were not prepared. Now they are prepared.
And at this year's Terra Madre event, more ideas were being developed to keep the animals and the cheese making alive in Ukraine.
Together with Australian team, we invented today at Terra Madre, we invented a new project to help our cheesemakers to survive in this winter, during this winter, because we know that 80% of our electricity stations are ruined. So we don't know how we will survive without electricity, without heating and so on. And at least to help animals. For instance, Dan Saladino wants to adopt a cow. So you can choose the cow you like, the name, which kind of herbs it likes, and so on and so on.
You get to know the story of that cow.
Yeah, the story, yes, her everyday life, its everyday life, and so on and so on. If you agree, you will transfer, let's say, 10 euros every month. Yeah. But at the end, in 2 years, you will receive here the cheese from this cow, let's say. Yeah. Yes, that will be stationed for 2 years.
So there's a lot of determination in Ukraine to save these traditions.
Yes, of course. And for instance, borscht. When we have attacks, when you feel you are endangered, we ladies, we start to make borscht. It's like a resistance. Okay, so you are bombing us. We will cook borscht. Yeah. We ask ourselves each other and say, do you also cook borscht? It's just everybody says yes.
Why can you explain
No.
the important? No.
No, I can't. I understand it's important, but it's like I feel I'm Ukrainian, I feel I'm strong, and I do what my tradition did. So we are so resistant, we are so unbreakable.
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 Yeah.
The unbreakable Yulia Petienko speaking to me at this year's Terra Madre. Most events at Terra Madre took place within the Parca Dora. Most, but not all.
So we're walking down the side of the mountain now. Very steep, sort of sliding my way down.
An hour and a half's drive from the park and into the Italian Alps, a drinks maker from New Jersey, Danny Childs, was navigating mountain slopes in search of ingredients.
Little by little, but I think I got probably a pound of juniper berries, which feels like nothing. Harvesting by hand. In the beginning, it was sort of a learning experience of figuring out what the best way was to pick them without getting needles stuck in your hand. Oh, just slid. I'm confident with another few days of being out here, I could get pretty good at harvesting juniper, maybe even good enough to be on the Bordiga team. We'll see if they accept my application.
The Bordiga he mentioned is the distillery in the Alps which has been making vermouth with wild ingredients, including juniper, since the 19th century. Danny was lending a hand. Now an endangered plant in many parts of Europe, juniper is still abundant in the Italian Alps.
we're climbing up like a 60-degree angled mountain, picking the species of juniper local to here. It's very spiny, so like, you keep hearing people kind of say ouch as they're doing this. Some people sliding down the hill on their rear ends. This particular species of juniper, Juniperus communis, it grows widely here. It's sort of a low-hanging shrub, kind of spindly branches, and the juniper berries, which are actually not berries, they're cones. When they ripen, they turn from green to like a dark blue, almost like purple, and that's when they're ready to harvest because their sugars are the ripest at that point. And so you have to find the right branch, and then comes the harder part of like getting those berries off of this very spiky plant. Juniper brings the taste of the forest. It tastes like almost like a Christmas tree in its own way. It's a little bit citrusy and herbaceous. So obviously they're using it to distill. There's a really great Polish beverage made with juniper berries called smreka, where they take those purple berries and they allow them to ferment for about a month until dry, and they make this juniper beer.
Danny Charles has become one of the world's leading experts in using drinks to showcase the wonders of nature. Through his book Slow Drinks, he started a movement dedicated to reconnecting beverages with biodiversity.
Before stepping behind the bar, I was well on my way to becoming a professional ethnobotanist. And I studied with 3 different indigenous groups in South America, the Shipibo, who live in the Peruvian Amazon, the Mapuche, who live in the northern part of Patagonia in southern Chile, and the Lican Antay, or Atacameños, that live in the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. And with these groups, I studied with shamans and medicine men and women to learn how they used plants for medicine. And it was the first time that I saw different extraction techniques being used on plants that many of which I use today. And it was the first time that I really saw cultures that were inextricably linked to the plants that grow around them in a way that our culture has largely lost.
And when he started to explore the landscapes around his home in New Jersey, he realised he could help bring back some of the lost knowledge.
It kind of was this aha moment where it was like, there's ethnobotany where I'm from. Of course there is. There are plants, and these plants have stories and histories. And I began to get into preservation and fermentation, infusions, pickling, shrubs, all of those fun things.
Can you give an example, an illustration of the type of ingredients, the kind of drinks that you were telling stories about?
Yeah, so sassafras, for example, the original root beer ingredient. Made by a fellow New Jerseyan, Charles Hyers, and long before he made commercial root beer, it was a very important medicinal plant and also culinary plant for Native American groups pretty much east of the Mississippi. So diving in and telling the story about their connection to it, tracing it forward to how the European settlers began to utilize this plant.
As medicine or flavoring?
It was actually considered medicine. It was the U.S.'s second highest export, botanical export after tobacco, going back to Europe to be taken as medicine. And then people learned that you could synthesize MDMA, ecstasy, from it. And it got blacklisted. And so now you're not allowed to have sassafras in commercial food and drink. However, the studies that they based that on are very sort of misleading. They extracted this very potent chemical, safrole, and they gave it to these lab rats at really high concentrations for an extended period of time. And I think that had more to do with the implications of people having access to this potential drug-making plant.
How was it used by indigenous people? I mean, how was it considered to be medicine? What were the ailments?
They would make tea out of it. And I think a lot of different groups had a lot of different uses, but respiratory illnesses, for example, to soothe the stomach, even the leaves, different parts of different plants have different properties. So the leaves are almost like have sort of an antiseptic property that you can use with wounds and things like that. But in food, they use it still to this day to make traditional Louisiana gumbo with sassafras filet. And I learned of that from the Ark of Taste.
The Ark of Taste is Slow Food's catalogue of the world's most endangered foods, around 6,000 of them from 150 countries. In the US alone, there are 200 of these endangered products, including sassafras. There's also the American pawpaw.
My favorite fruit many foragers' favorite fruit.
What does it look like?
It looks like an oblong mango. It is America's largest native fruit, basically migrated north through megafauna during the last ice age, so giant sloths eating their tropical relatives, cherimoya and soursop. And as they went north and they excreted the seeds, the plant began to change. And so we have this, for all intents and purposes, tropical fruit growing in New Jersey that tastes like a mix between a banana and a mango and a pineapple. It's so special. But no one's ever tried it because it falls off the tree and it's rotten in basically 2 days. I was able to preserve it. And so taking 60 pounds of pawpaw to make over 1,000 pawpaw pisco sours a year, I think that I played a really integral part in introducing probably over 1,000 people or more to this really special native fruit that we have. Being able to highlight the biodiversity in our world and my region, and using drinks as the medium to do that is one of my greatest passions.
Why?
Because it's a very approachable way for people to connect to these things that they may have never heard of or never tasted, that in some cases are growing right under their noses. And I think that a beverage in and of itself is very approachable. It's sort of this treat element. Once they hear the story and maybe try a little sample, that becomes a way to introduce them to all kinds of biodiverse ingredients and all of these stories in the Arc of Taste.
Danny Childs, author of the multi-award-winning book Slow Drinks.
None of it is rocket science. Generally the fermentation is driven by microorganisms that are present on food. And,
This voice might be familiar to Food Programme listeners. It's fermentation expert Sandor Katz, who was at Terra Madre talking about the lost connection between us and another form of biodiversity. The microbes behind some of the world's most delicious traditions, from sourdough to sauerkraut, chocolate to kimchi. All fermented foods. For Sandor, even the word became an obsession. Fermentation as a metaphor.
From the time that I first became obsessed with fermentation, I would always take note when I was reading an article or an essay or a book, and people would refer to some place and time as being a place of great musical ferment or artistic ferment or spiritual ferment. And so I would perk up every time I saw a reference to the word fermentation being used in a metaphorical way. And it turns out that, in the English language, people have been using fermentation in a metaphorical way for many hundreds of years, really to describe, any kind of bubbly or excited phenomenon. We can even talk about our emotions fermenting. Certainly politics can be very bubbly and effervescent, and
especially right now.
Any kind of social movements rely upon people getting excited about ideas, about possibilities, how things could change. And so I think that fermentation really, underlies, almost all social movements, because, you have to get people excited about the idea that things can be different. These dogs over here, they're fermenting, it's if they're barking, we don't know what they're barking at, but they're barking at something. They're getting all bubbly. So, fermentation has very, far-reaching possibilities as a metaphor to describe, any number of phenomena.
What do you hope the years of teaching and writing has created? What is it that you hope the impact of years of this work is? Because I think partly it is about empowerment. I think it is making people think differently, not only about food but about the world. But do you feel, particularly from the feedback you get, that you have given people a sense of agency?
Yeah. Absolutely. I would say that, in the broader culture, fermentation has been fermenting. And, as I'm always pointing out that, you don't have to be aware of food or aware of fermentation in order to enjoy it, because almost every person, almost everywhere eats and drinks products of fermentation every day. But, I think what's happening is that more and more people are becoming aware of this phenomenon, or becoming interested in this phenomenon, and are wanting to find some direct connection to it and try fermenting something at home. And, certainly it's not that like everyone in the world is interested in fermenting in their kitchens, but I think that, more and more people are interested in trying their hand at fermentation, and certainly seeking out products of fermentation. I mean, since my first time, teaching in the UK, which was probably 2008, I've seen like just such increased availability of a diversity of fermented products, and that tells me that there are people who are interested in it. And certainly, in my visits to the UK, I meet lots and lots of people who, are interested enough to do it themselves at home and wanting to sort of build up confidence and learn how to make different things. But, way beyond those people, I think that there are people who are hearing about fermentation, hearing about probiotics, wanting to, access these foods and some of the benefits of these foods. And, definitely it's a growing movement, not only in the UK, but in many different places.
I mean, we're here at Terra Madre to learn, to experience, to find out, to celebrate biodiversity, the diversity in our food. And I think there is nothing that could rival the biodiversity of microbes. This idea that what you are teaching people is to welcome back in the microbes into not only their food, but their lives.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And, like if we consider the question of, why is it that fermentation is practiced absolutely everywhere in the world? Like the answer is biodiversity. The answer is because all of the plants and all of the animal products that make up our food are populated by these elaborate communities of microorganisms. But, I mean, honestly, like people around the world have become more interested in fermented foods because we've become more aware of the importance of bacteria, in the biological world around us, and most importantly within us. And so, I hardly think that I can claim credit for this growing awareness. I think it's science developed the tools that enabled around the dawn of the new millennium the Human Microbiome Project and the increased recognition by science of the biodiversity within our bodies, and a growing understanding of the importance of that biodiversity to various physiological processes, from digestion to our immune function, and now our growing understanding of the role of gut bacteria in our brain chemistry and our mental health. And so I think it's really on the basis of sort of scientific advancement that so many people are becoming aware of bacteria and the importance of these, bacteria-rich foods that are built on biodiversity that was always there, even if we didn't know about it.
Nearby, fermentation was happening in real time. A network of bakers from across Italy were taking turns to showcase bread diversity from 80 different regions.
So we are here in a mobile bakery lab. We are here as a PAU, that is in Italian is Panificatori Agricoli Urbani, which is an association of different bakeries in Italy. Our aim is to give bread his own original value back. We are more than 80 bakeries, all artisans, craft bakers in all over the Italy. One of our aims is to share together our knowledge, our problems as well, and this is important because sometimes you feel a bit lonely, but it's important to remember that we are a network.
And it's a network that isn't focused only on saving recipes or techniques, also the agro-biodiversity disappearing in Italy since the Second World War, the populations of wheat lost to more intensive production.
Il mio forno fa parte di un gruppo.
7 years ago, founder of the PAU network, Lorenzo Canoli, brought back an extinct wheat to Rimini. He helped locate seeds collected in the 1920s by the Russian botanist Nikolai Vavilov.
Ancora più giusto nell'abitare le case e I campi.
It was like a missing part of our culture, he says. Part of our identity, our inheritance. These wheats were in the bodies and in the blood of my ancestors, and I want that for my children.
Il sangue, the blood of questo sangue.
And in bringing back more wheat diversity, they've also had to rethink how to bake bread and what a loaf can be. Spending time with the Italian bakers was a baker from Canada.
So my name is Matthew James Duffy, and I have a YouTube channel all about the education for bakers, mostly specializing in sourdough, and you can find it at Matthew James Duffy or at Sourdough Duffy. I think this is important for a number of reasons. One is just integrity of ingredient, respect for ingredient. They're working with ingredients that are grown within 50 kilometers, milled within 50 kilometers, reviving heritage grains. And I think really the learning part here is learning how to work with the grains. So rather than saying, I want to make this type of bread, what wheat do I need? They said, I've got this wheat, we're going to make this type of bread out of it.
What can the grain become, rather than we need to fit the grain into this image of what a loaf of bread is?
I heard someone say this yesterday. Normally you put the horse before the carriage, and the horse is the baker, the carriage is the wheat. But in this case, they're putting the carriage first, the carriage is the wheat, and then they're deciding, well, where does the horse go? Which direction does it take it in? And sort of like formulating based on that, which is cool. It's even like region to region, the breads are so specific, even 50 kilometers away. So when you get in one town to the next town, it's different because of what they're using, which is so cool, right?
Films are also screened at Terra Madre. This one, entitled Stockfish by Norwegian filmmaker Harry Johansen, followed the journey of cod from the North Atlantic, fished by some of Europe's last indigenous people, the Sami. We see the cod being brought onto the fjords of Finnmark in the Arctic Circle and hung up on wooden structures to be air-dried through the winter months, and eventually sent to be cooked thousands of miles away in southern Europe. A technique and a smaller-scale supply chain that's existed for centuries, but now disappearing. And again, it's a story that reveals how one tradition brings together so many complex processes and ideas. Marta Messer.
When you also look at these examples of the stockfish being air-dried and so on, where you also see that the success of a certain product depends on an ecosystem that overall is healthy. Because you want air to be clean, you want the sea to be clean and not polluted. Because of course, and you want the fish to be healthy and be able to reproduce and being able to, repopulate itself, so that you can keep on fishing without impacting and damaging the population, the fish population, which is another big issue we have with overfishing and the exploitation of the seas. It's not enough then that just that the environment is well treated, which is absolutely important, and we need to do a much better job at that, given how we're going well beyond the planetary boundaries in terms of our use of natural resources. But it also needs to be absolutely produced in the respect of everyone and all the food workers and all the food systems workers, because otherwise, we would have the aftertaste of, in our food products, the aftertaste of slavery, which is unfortunately something that is still very widely practiced, even in Europe.
Marta Messer of Slow Food. So what relevance of these stories to the process unfolding in Colombia, COP16, and the quest to save global biodiversity? Well, by saving food diversity and working with nature, we can create food systems that not only support the planet, but also provide resilience. So says Professor Tim Benton, Distinguished Fellow in the Environment and Society Programme at Chatham House.
I think the big thing looking ahead in years to come is not productivity growth. It is about ensuring that plants, crops in general, and animals can live in very rapidly changing climatic conditions. And so it's about resilience. And if nothing else, historical knowledge have to have been about being able to rely on the crops that you need for your own food security, because otherwise you die. And so a lot of the agroecological approaches based on indigenous knowledge are about enhancing that biodiversity, not putting all of your eggs in a single basket of a single crop grown in a single way that might fall over given any single circumstance. There are just many different ways that the traditional historical ways of producing food are inherently more resilient than modern monocrop agriculture.
But Tim, do you think we can save biodiversity and feed the world?
My own feeling is, because I don't think it's ever been comprehensively modelled, my own feeling is that if we were to eat healthily and waste less and eat diverse range of fruit and vegetables and perhaps less meat, which is very land intensive, we could have a global food system that produces enough food to feed everybody in a healthy way, but it obviously requires significant change in both industry and the way that people interact with foods in terms of being willing to change and perhaps eating less of the kind of modern industrial style, high sugar, high fat, ultra processed foods, and trading off convenience for eating more kind of whole food type diets. So it is possible, I think, to feed the world in a sustainable way that is nutritious, that preserves biodiversity, reduces climate impacts, makes people healthy, but it's not an incremental change from where we are today.
What do you mean by this not being incremental change?
Meaning it's not change this by 1% or change this by 2%. It is a matter of significantly changing what is grown, where it's grown, how it's grown, and how people eat it. So the whole kind of broad, if you go into a supermarket, 70% of what most people eat have broadly the same ingredients. They come in packages. It would be very difficult to maintain the demand for that food consumption in a world where we are only growing using agroecological, biodiversity-friendly, climate-friendly farming approaches.
So to save biodiversity and feed the world, we'll need more options for the future, a transformation of the global food system, and much more resilience. It's a big ask, but as a species, we've spent thousands of years creating amazing diversity we can draw on, which is what I took away from my walk with Alexis Nicole Nelson.
So this is Chenopodium. It looks like Chenopodium alba. So that's going to be in America we call it white goosefoot or lamb's quarters. Goosefoot makes sense because look at the
We'd stumbled across a plant that's a relative of quinoa, a stand-in for spinach with edible seeds. Its lower leaves were shiny, sparkling in the sun, their waxy surface protecting the moisture inside. In drier parts of the world, the ancient knowledge attached to this plant could make it a more important source of future food.
Drought tolerant, and one of the ways that they are so drought tolerant are these tiny little spheres of wax that they produce on their leaves, which helps them better maintain their moisture levels. At least in my neck of the woods, in the summertime when it's been 3 weeks since it's rained, a lot of non-native plants, they'll dry out. But chenopodiums have this built-in protection system.
Just one example of how nature and biodiversity can provide answers, which is one of the reasons it's in our interest to save it.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify is there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/work. Shopify.com/work.